According to a 2022 survey, 61% of men over 50 said they felt emotionally invisible in their last relationship. Not abused, not cheated on, just unseen. She doesn't have to raise her voice. She doesn't have to hit you, threaten you, or cheat on you, to destroy you. Carl Jung warned us about women like this. Not evil, not malicious, but dangerous in ways that most men never see coming. She will praise you in public and chip away at your soul in private. She will mirror your dreams, while draining the very energy you need to pursue them. She will hold your hand, sleep in your bed, say all the right words, and still leave you feeling utterly alone. And here's the part most men miss. She doesn't even know she's doing it. Jung called it the unconscious shadow of the feminine, a psychological force so subtle, so disguised, that by the time you feel its effect, it's already too late. You'll wake up one day exhausted, disconnected, spiritually lost, wondering how you became a stranger in your own home. And you'll blame yourself, because she never hit you, she never screamed, she never told you to leave. But she also never let you rest, never let you lead, never let you be fully yourself. In this video, we're going to unpack the 3 female behaviors Carl Jung warned about, not to condemn women, but to protect the man who still values his soul, his clarity, and his peace. Because after 50, you can't afford to entertain chaos disguised as love. Your boundaries, your energy, your life's second half depends on who you allow close. Let's begin. Carl Jung wasn't just a psychologist, he was a map maker of the soul. He didn't teach men how to chase women, he warned them about who they were becoming around the wrong ones. Jung believed that every human being carried unconscious energies, parts of ourselves we hide, repress, or deny. And in women, these energies can take powerful forms. He called it the anima when it appeared in men, the inner feminine. But he also wrote of the possessed feminine, the shadow side of womanhood, when unresolved wounds turn into unconscious destruction. The danger isn't always dramatic. It's often subtle, disguised as passion, wrapped in beauty. And for men, especially those over 50, it's easy to mistake emotional chaos for aliveness, easy to confuse manipulation for mystery, easy to lose yourself in trying to be what she projects onto you. But when a woman's unconscious shadow is left unchecked, she doesn't just harm herself, she pulls you in, and if you're not awake, you won't even see it happening. That's what Jung was trying to show us. Not to fear women, not to fight them, but to recognize when we are being drawn into something that doesn't feed our soul, it feeds on it. So in this video, we're going to explore 3 female behaviors that Jung's work clearly warned us about. They're not always loud, they're not always labeled toxic, but they will destroy your peace if you let them stay too close, too long. Because after 50, your time is too sacred to be spent unraveling someone else's shadow. I once knew a woman who never shouted, never cursed, never raised her hand, but every day with her felt like walking through a thunderstorm with no sky above. You never knew what version of her you'd meet. One morning, she'd kiss you like you were the center of her world. That night, she'd go quiet for hours, not out of pain, but control. If you asked what was wrong, she'd say, nothing. But you could feel the storm just beneath her skin. It took me years to realize that wasn't love, that was chaos, disguised as passion. Carl Jung described this energy as what happens when the shadow of the feminine takes over. When a woman hasn't integrated her emotional wounds, her need for validation, her fear of abandonment, her inner volatility, it doesn't disappear. It externalizes. It attaches itself to a man, not for connection, but for regulation. In her world, drama isn't a problem, it's oxygen. She creates chaos, not because she's cruel, but because she's addicted to emotional spikes. And the more stable you are, the more she'll provoke you, just to feel something real. To her, your peace feels like abandonment. Your stillness feels like threat, and over time, you begin to walk on eggshells. Not because she's yelling, but because she's unpredictable. This is the trap for good men over 50. You mistake her emotional volatility for depth. You think, at least she feels something. But what you don't see is that every emotional spike is costing you clarity. Every mood swing is robbing you of your nervous system. Every silent treatment is turning you into a version of yourself you don't even recognize. Jung would call this being caught in the projection field. Her inner chaos becomes your outer confusion. Have you ever been in a relationship like that, where silence felt heavier than shouting? Comment yes if you've lived through that kind of tension, or still healing if you're still finding your way out, and unless you step out of it, she'll never need to deal with her shadow because you're too busy absorbing it. So, if emotional chaos has been normalized in your past, if you've confused intensity with intimacy, you're not alone. But now you know, what feels alive might actually be unhealed. And here's the hardest part. Chaos isn't the only danger. Sometimes what breaks you isn't noise. It's the quiet way she makes you doubt your own reality. Let's talk about projection and how it turns love into a war you didn't know you were drafted into. There was a time in my life when I thought I had finally met someone who understood me. She noticed details others ignored. She mirrored my values. She admired the way I handled pressure, how I held things together even when life got hard. For a while it felt like connection, but over time I began to realize she wasn't really seeing me. She was seeing a version of me she had built in her own mind, a fantasy, an archetype. The caretaker, the steady one, the man who would never fall apart. And the moment I did, the moment I showed sadness or fatigue or confusion, something in her shifted. She grew cold, distant, almost disappointed. At first I blamed myself, but then I remembered what Jung wrote about projection. We always see our own unavowed mistakes in our opponent. When a woman hasn't faced her own inner pain, she'll unconsciously assign it to the man she's closest to. You stop being a partner and start becoming a screen. She projects her father's absence onto your detachment. She blames you for the betrayal she never healed from. She twists your silence into judgment. Even when you're just trying to breathe, it's not always obvious. It can come as compliments at first. You're so grounded. You're nothing like my ex. But those compliments carry weight, expectations, and the moment you deviate from her ideal, you're no longer useful. You become disappointing, you become dangerous, and you start to feel like you're being punished for wounds that were never yours to carry. I used to lie awake at night asking myself, why do I feel so guilty around her? Why do I feel like I'm always apologizing for something I didn't do? It took me years to name it. It wasn't guilt, it was projection, and I know I'm not alone. If you've ever felt the same, like her pain became your responsibility, like her silence became your shame, then maybe this isn't just my story, maybe it's yours too, because some women don't argue. They assign not facts, but feelings, not truth, but their unresolved trauma. And you become the canvas for every stroke they refuse to look at in themselves. So what do you do with a woman like this? Do you fight to show her the real you? Do you shrink just to stay close? Here's the truth Jung left us with. If people can be educated to see the shadow side of their nature, they might also learn to understand and love their fellow men or women. But if she refuses to see her own shadow and keeps throwing it at you, you are not required to keep catching it. You're allowed to walk away from the version of you that never existed. Because the only thing more painful than not being seen is being seen wrong. And that brings us to something even more dangerous than projection, the woman who drains you without a word. There are women who don't argue, they don't manipulate, they don't even raise their voice, they just drain you. I once dated a woman like that in my mid-50s. On paper, nothing seemed wrong. We rarely fought. She was soft-spoken, kind. But every time I left her presence, I felt like I had to lie down, as if part of me stayed behind, and I couldn't. Explain why? She didn't ask for much, but somehow I was always giving, not in gifts or chores, but in presence, in energy. She didn't want solutions. She wanted to be felt, held, absorbed. And slowly, I began to vanish. Carl Jung wrote about this, the unseen exchange between souls. He believed that when a person is disconnected from their own life force, they unconsciously pull it from others, not with malice, but with hunger. This isn't drama, it's depletion. She doesn't burn you, she empties you. You don't notice it right away, it creeps in. You skip the gym, you stop calling your friends, you forget what you used to love. You start confusing being needed with being loved. And the worst part, she thinks she's being good to you. She tells you, "I love how calm you are." But what she really means is, "I love how much of yourself you're willing to lose for me." Have you ever felt that way? Like you're in a relationship where everything looks peaceful, but your soul is screaming for air. If that's ever been you, even once, you're not imagining it. You were likely carrying both your own emotional weight and hers. And here's what Jung would say: when we carry energy that isn't ours, our psyche starts to fracture. We become emotionally disoriented, unable to tell what's true for us anymore. I remember waking up one morning and not recognizing the man in the mirror. He looked tired, not just in his face, but in his presence, like he hadn't been home in a while, and he hadn't, because I had handed over the keys to someone else, slowly without noticing until I wasn't even sure how to get back inside. You don't always lose yourself in abuse. Sometimes you lose yourself in quiet neediness, so if it feels peaceful, but you feel numb, pay attention. Love doesn't deplete, it restores. And if she only feels alive when you're running on empty, it's time to leave the gas station behind. So, what do you do with all of this? You've just seen 3 behaviors that don't scream, but they steal. They don't look toxic on the surface, but they erode you from within. They don't break you with force, but they unmake you with slow, invisible pressure. Carl Jung never wrote about women to shame them. He wrote to awaken us, men and women alike, to what happens when unconscious wounds rule our relationships, the chaos, the projection, the quiet depletion. If you're a man over 50, this hits harder because you've already survived so much. You've lost, built, rebuilt. You've learned how to stay. But staying in the wrong dynamic isn't loyalty. It's self-abandonment. You are not here to be a regulator for her chaos. You are not here to be a mirror for her projection. And you are not here to be a battery pack for someone who forgot how to charge her own soul. You are here, as Jung might say, to return to yourself, to withdraw your energy from the places that dishonor it, to reclaim the peace that silence tried to steal. So if you've seen yourself in any of these stories, I want you to hear this. You are not weak for walking away. You are wise for noticing the pattern. You don't need permission to protect your peace, only the courage to remember it's yours.